The news spread like wildfire. By sunrise, every corner of the small town buzzed with whispers. Asterisk, did you hear? Evelyn Carter is marrying a boy young enough to be her grandson. Asterisk. By noon, the grocery store aisles, barber shops, and church steps turned into gossip centers. And by evening, it seemed like no one could speak of anything else. 85-year-old Evelyn Carter, one of the wealthiest women in the county, had agreed to marry a man 60 years younger than her. His name was Daniel Brooks, a struggling 25-year-old laborer who barely owned more than 2 pairs of shoes. For many, it was entertainment. For others, it was scandal. Some shook their heads in disbelief, muttering about asterisk sign asterisk and asterisk shame asterisk. Some laughed cruelly, calling Daniel a asterisk gold digger asterisk. And a few, very few, dared to whisper, asterisk maybe, just maybe, it's love, asterisk. Evelyn's mansion sat on a quiet hilltop, overlooking the town. The iron gates, the rose gardens, the polished marble floors all whispered of old money and silent loneliness. She had lived a full life, wealth, parties, respect. Yet behind the silk dresses and diamond necklaces, she carried an emptiness that decades of luxury could not fill. Her husband had died 20 years ago. Her children lived abroad, too busy with their own lives. Friends passed away one after another, until she found herself surrounded only by memories and shadows. On the surface, she was powerful. But inside, she longed for something simple, something human, a hand to hold, a voice that cared, a soul that would sit with her in silence and still make her feel alive. Daniel's life was the opposite of Evelyn's. He grew up in poverty, raised by a single mother who worked 2 jobs to keep food on the table. From a young age, he learned the value of hard work, stacking crates at the market, washing cars, fixing fences, whatever paid a few dollars. Dreams of college slipped through his fingers because survival came first. Yet despite the weight of his struggles, Daniel carried something rare, kindness. He had the kind of smile that could ease a stranger's burden, and the kind of eyes that spoke of resilience. But poverty is cruel. Daniel often went to bed hungry, and sometimes, hope itself seemed like a luxury he couldn't afford. Nobody in town could understand it. How could a poor young man and a wealthy old woman possibly fall in love? Daniel's life was the opposite of Evelyn's. He grew up in poverty, raised by a single mother who worked 2 jobs to keep food on the table. From a young age, he learned the value of hard work, stacking crates at the market, washing cars, fixing fences, whatever paid a few dollars. Dreams of college slipped through his fingers because survival came first. Yet despite the weight of his struggles, Daniel carried something rare, kindness. He had the kind of smile that could ease a stranger's burden, and the kind of eyes that spoke of resilience. But poverty is cruel. Daniel often went to bed hungry, and sometimes, hope itself seemed like a luxury he couldn't afford. Nobody in town could understand it. How could a poor young man and a wealthy old woman possibly fall in love? But destiny, as it often does, had plans that ignored logic, age, and the judgment of society. Their paths were about to cross not by design, but by a small act of chance. An act that would set in motion the most whispered about love story the town had ever seen. It happened on an ordinary Thursday afternoon. The sun was warm, the streets busy, and Daniel was hauling heavy boxes from a delivery truck to the corner store. Sweat ran down his forehead, his shirt clung to his back, but he pushed on because every hour meant money, and money meant survival. Across the street, Evelyn Carter's black limousine slowed to a stop. She rarely came into town herself, but on that day, she insisted. She wanted to choose her own flowers from the market, a rare rebellion against the careful life her staff arranged for her. As she stepped out of the car, leaning on her cane, the world seemed to pause, heads turned, whispers followed. Evelyn was a legend in this town, the rich widow with silver hair and a diamond ring that glimmered even in the shade. She walked with grace, but her body betrayed her. The pavement was uneven, and before anyone could stop it, her cane slipped. Her frail body tilted forward, her breath caught. She was about to fall. And then 2 strong arms caught her. Daniel had seen it from across the street. Without thinking, he dropped the box in his hands and ran. He reached her just in time, steadying her against his chest. Careful, ma'am, he said, his voice low but steady. The ground here isn't safe. Evelyn blinked up at him, startled. She expected to see one of her drivers or bodyguards. Instead, she found herself looking into the eyes of a stranger. Dark, warm eyes that carried both hardship and kindness. For a long moment, neither spoke. She studied his face, the sharp jawline, the sweat dripping from his temple, the calluses on his hands. He studied hers, wrinkled skin, silver hair, and yet a dignity that seemed untouched by age. "Thank you," she whispered, regaining her breath. "Of course," Daniel replied, helping her steady herself on the cane. "Are you all right?" "I am now," she said softly. It was nothing more than a few seconds, but something passed between them. Not romance, not yet. Something quieter. Recognition, perhaps. The recognition of two souls who had carried loneliness far too long. Her driver rushed forward, fussing. "Mrs. Carter, are you hurt? Please, let me help you." But Evelyn raised her hand. "It's fine. This young man already did." Daniel smiled faintly, picked up his dropped box, and started to turn away. He didn't expect more. Why would he? She was rich, powerful, and decades older. He was just a poor worker in a worn-out shirt. But then he heard her voice again. "What's your name, young man?" He stopped, looked back. "Daniel. Daniel Brooks." She nodded slowly, as if memorizing it. "Well, Daniel Brooks, thank you for catching me." Her words were simple, but something in the way she said them stayed with him for the rest of the day. And as Evelyn's limousine pulled away, she found herself repeating his name silently in her mind. Daniel Brooks. They didn't know it yet, but that small accident, the slip of a cane, the catch of two arms, was the beginning of everything. Days passed, but neither forgot that brief meeting. Evelyn often found herself replaying the moment in her mind, the steadiness of his arms, the softness in his eyes, the way he asked if she was all right without a trace of pity. She had lived 85 years, met countless men in suits and polished shoes, but none had looked at her the way Daniel did, as a person, not as a title. Daniel, meanwhile, thought about her while stacking crates and scrubbing floors. He couldn't explain why. She was older than his grandmother, rich beyond measure, and yet she had thanked him with a gentleness he hadn't felt in years. It made him wonder about her life beyond the iron gates of that mansion. 1 week later, fate played its hand again. Daniel was unloading sacks of grain at the town market when he saw the familiar limousine stop by the flower stall. And there she was, Evelyn Carter, standing tall with her cane, examining roses with surprising care. Daniel hesitated. Should he say something? Would she even remember him? His heart urged him forward, while his mind warned him to stay invisible. But before he could decide, she turned and their eyes met. A slow smile spread across Evelyn's face. "Daniel Brooks," she said, as though she had been expecting him. He blinked in surprise. "You remember me?" "Of course," she said, adjusting the pearls at her neck. "You don't forget the man who catches you when you're about to meet the pavement." Daniel chuckled. "I suppose not." Evelyn gestured toward the flower stall. "Tell me, Daniel, which of these roses would you choose?" He frowned, caught off guard. "For what?" "For yourself," she said. "Not for anyone else. Just for you." Daniel looked at the rows of flowers, vibrant reds, soft pinks, gentle whites. His life had been too full of work to think about such things. But after a pause, he pointed to a single yellow rose. "Why that one?" Evelyn asked. "It feels honest," he said slowly. "Not trying too hard. Bright, but not overwhelming." Evelyn's lips curved. "Interesting choice. Most men would have gone for the red." "Maybe most men don't spend enough time noticing the yellow," Daniel replied with a half-smile. Her laughter, warm and genuine, surprised him. It surprised her too. She hadn't laughed like that in years. Her driver returned with the purchase, But Evelyn lingered. You work here often? Yes, ma'am, whenever there's a delivery, Daniel answered. Then perhaps I'll see you again, she said, her eyes holding his for a moment longer than necessary. Daniel nodded, though his chest felt strange, like something unspoken had just passed between them. As her car drove away, he caught himself smiling at nothing in particular. And Evelyn, seated in the back of her limousine, gently held the yellow rose in her lap. For the first time in a long while, she felt less like an old woman, and more like a woman simply alive. The mansion on the hill was more rumor than reality to most townsfolk. Children whispered about its endless rooms and golden staircases, while adults muttered about Evelyn Carter's fortune and what she must have done to keep it. But for Daniel Brooks, the mansion was just another symbol of a life he would never touch until the day he received the invitation. It came unexpectedly. Daniel was finishing a long shift at the market when a sleek, black car pulled up beside him. A man in a tailored suit stepped out. "Mr. Brooks?" he asked. Daniel nodded, wiping sweat from his brow. "Mrs. Carter would like to see you, at her residence." Daniel froze. For a moment he thought it was a joke, but the man's expression was serious. He could hardly imagine why a woman like Evelyn Carter would want to see him, but his heart quickened as curiosity outweighed caution. That evening, Daniel walked up the stone driveway, his work boots scuffing against the polished path. The mansion loomed above him, its windows glowing golden in the twilight. He felt out of place, like a shadow in a world carved from wealth. Evelyn greeted him at the door herself. Not a servant, not a butler. Evelyn. She wore a soft blue gown and pearls, her silver hair pinned neatly, her cane in hand. "Daniel," she said warmly, as if he were an old friend, "you came." "I wasn't sure why you invited me," he admitted. "Because I wanted to," she replied simply. Then, with a faint smile, "Will you walk with me?" She led him through a side door into her vast garden. Rows of roses, tulips, and orchids stretched into the evening air, their scents mixing with the cool breeze. "It's beautiful," Daniel said, genuinely awed. "It's quiet," Evelyn corrected. "That's what I love about it. Too many people mistake quiet for loneliness." Daniel looked at her, noting the way her eyes lingered on the flowers as though they carried memories. "And for you," he asked softly, "is it loneliness?" She paused, her grip tightening on her cane. Then she sighed. "Sometimes, most of the time, but not tonight." Something about the way she said it made Daniel's chest tighten. He didn't reply. Instead, he bent down and plucked a single daisy growing stubbornly between the roses. He handed it to her. Her hands trembled as she accepted it. No diamond, no ruby, no pearl had ever felt so valuable to her. They sat on a stone bench in the middle of the garden. Evelyn asked about his life, his work, his mother, his struggles. Daniel spoke honestly, unpolished, his words carrying the weight of hardship but also resilience. "No one has ever asked me about these things," he confessed at one point. "Then they've been blind," she said firmly. "There's more dignity in your struggle than in all the parties I've ever attended." Daniel blinked, stunned by her sincerity. No one had ever spoken to him like that, not without judgment, not without pity. For the first time, Evelyn felt her age fall away. For the first time, Daniel felt seen not as a poor laborer, but as a man with worth. When it was time to leave, Evelyn walked him back to the door. "Thank you for coming," she said softly. "Thank you for inviting me," Daniel replied. He hesitated, then added, "Most people like you wouldn't waste a minute on someone like me." She lifted her chin. "Then most people are fools." Daniel smiled, bowing his head slightly before stepping into the night. And Evelyn, closing the door behind him, pressed the daisy to her chest and whispered his name into the empty halls. Daniel Brooks. The town was small, and in small towns, nothing stayed secret for long. At first, It was little things. Someone saw Daniel walking up the hill to the mansion. Someone else spotted Evelyn's car parked near the market. Then came the stories, each retelling more exaggerated than the last. Have you heard? That old widow's got herself a young man. They say he visits her house at night. Disgusting. She's old enough to be his great-grandmother. He's after her money, nothing else. The whispers turned into laughter, the laughter into mockery. And soon, Daniel found himself the subject of cold stares whenever he walked into town. One afternoon, as Daniel worked at the market, two men leaned against the fence, smirking. "Hey, Romeo," one called. "How's life with your sugar granny?" The other laughed loudly, and a few more joined in. Daniel's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Silence was his shield. He had no time for arguments, yet inside he burned. It wasn't shame that hurt him, it was the insult to Evelyn. To him, she wasn't a joke. She was dignity, warmth, and the first person who had truly listened to him. At the mansion, Evelyn too felt the shift. Invitations to luncheon stopped arriving. Old friends stopped calling. Even her own children, scattered across different cities, phoned less frequently. When she mentioned Daniel, their voices turned sharp. "Mother, this is embarrassing. What will people think?" "You're not yourself, Evelyn. Don't let that boy take advantage of you." Evelyn would simply listen, her heart heavy. When the calls ended, she would sit alone in her vast dining hall, staring at the empty chairs. The judgment of the world pressed on her, but she clung to one truth. Daniel's kindness was real. One evening, Daniel returned to the mansion after a long day. He found Evelyn sitting in the garden, staring at the fountain, her hands folded in her lap. "Are you all right?" he asked softly. She turned to him, her eyes glistening. "They're all laughing at me, Daniel. At us." He sat beside her, his rough hands resting on his knees. "Let them laugh. They don't know you. They don't know me." She looked at him for a long moment. "And you? Do you regret coming here, spending time with me?" Daniel shook his head firmly. "Not once." Evelyn's lips trembled into the faintest smile. "You'll lose friends, Daniel. People will hate you for this." "Then I'll let them go," he replied, "because I'd rather stand beside you than walk with 100 who don't care about me." The night grew colder, stars scattering across the sky. Evelyn placed her fragile hand on Daniel's, the touch trembling but steady. "You don't know what this means to me," she whispered. Daniel looked at her, his voice steady. "Then let me show you." "I won't run, Evelyn. Not from whispers. Not from stares. Not from you." And in that quiet garden, with only the fountain as witness, a promise was made, not spoken in grand vows, but etched into silence. A promise that would soon be tested by a world determined to tear them apart. The deeper their bond grew, the sharper the world's knives became. What had once been whispers turned into confrontations. No longer content with gossiping behind closed doors, people began voicing their judgments directly. It began with his closest companions. One evening, after a long day of labor, Daniel sat at a wooden table in the town's small diner. Two of his friends, Marcus and Jalen, slid into the booth across from him. "You've changed, man," Marcus said bluntly, stabbing his fork into his food. Daniel frowned. "What do you mean?" Jalen leaned forward. "We mean Evelyn Carter. The whole town's talking, Daniel. You're making a fool of yourself. She's old enough to be your great-grandmother." Daniel's jaw tightened. "She's also the only person who treats me like I matter." Marcus scoffed. "Come on, bro. Don't tell me you actually care about her. She's rich, she's lonely, and you, well, you're broke. Everyone thinks you're just waiting for her to die so you can take the money." The words hit like stones, but Daniel didn't flinch. He simply pushed his plate aside and stood up. "You know what hurts?" he said quietly. "Not the gossip, not the stares. It's knowing my friends see me as less than the man I am. If that's the case, maybe you were never really my friends. Without another word, he walked out into the night, leaving Marcus and Jalen staring in uneasy silence. Meanwhile, Evelyn faced her own battlefield. Her daughter, Lauren, flew in from New York after hearing the rumors. She arrived at the mansion in a storm of anger. "Mother, what are you doing?" Lauren demanded, pacing the living room. "This is humiliating. Do you understand how people are laughing at us?" Evelyn sat calmly in her armchair, Kane resting beside her. "Let them laugh. Their laughter doesn't dictate my happiness." Lauren threw up her hands. "Happiness? With a boy who could be your great-grandson, he's using you, Mother. He wants your money, your estate, your name." Evelyn's voice grew sharp. "Daniel Brooks has never once asked me for a dime. In fact, he refuses even the smallest gift." "Then he's playing a long game," Lauren snapped. "Wake up before it's too late." Evelyn's eyes narrowed, her voice steady with quiet fire. "Lauren, I have lived 85 years. I know when someone lies to me, and Daniel does not lie." The room fell silent. Lauren shook her head, defeated. "You'll regret this, Mother. I promise you will." But Evelyn did not bend. That night, Daniel and Evelyn met again in the garden. Both carried the weight of their separate battles, yet when their eyes met, the burden seemed lighter. "They're against us," Evelyn whispered. Daniel nodded. "So be it." "Even my own daughter," she said bitterly. "And my own friends," he admitted. For a long moment, they sat in silence, the fountain bubbling softly beside them. Finally, Daniel spoke. "Then we stop living for them. We live for us." Evelyn looked at him, this young man who should have been chasing his own future, yet chose to sit with her in her twilight years. Her heart ached with both joy and fear. "Daniel," she said softly, "this will not be easy." He met her gaze without hesitation. "I've never had it easy. But I'd rather fight the whole world with you than walk it peacefully without you." The night air grew colder, but neither moved. They sat together, two souls bound not by age, wealth, or expectation, but by something the world could neither name nor accept. And in that silence, a decision began to take root. If the world insisted on being their enemy, then perhaps it was time to stop hiding. Perhaps it was time to defy it openly. Autumn came with colder winds, and Evelyn's body began to betray her. At first, it was subtle fatigue after short walks, trembling hands when she held her cane. She brushed it off as age, but Daniel noticed. He always noticed. One evening, as they walked through the garden, Evelyn stumbled. Daniel caught her instantly, just as he had the first day they met. "Sit," he urged, guiding her to the stone bench. "I'm fine," she insisted, her pride flaring. But her breath came shallow, and her skin felt cold beneath his touch. "You're not fine," Daniel said firmly. His eyes, usually so gentle, now burned with worrying. "I'm taking you inside." The following morning, Daniel insisted on calling her physician. Evelyn protested. She hated fussing but eventually gave in. The doctor, a gray-haired man who had treated her for decades, delivered the words Daniel feared. "She's strong," the doctor said, "but her heart is weakening. Stress, fatigue, and age are catching up with her. She must rest, avoid emotional strain." When the doctor left, Evelyn sat in silence, her eyes fixed on the window. "Rest," she murmured bitterly, "as if I haven't rested my whole life." Daniel knelt before her, his hands gently covering hers. "Then let me carry the weight with you." Her eyes glistened. "You don't deserve this, Daniel. You're young, full of life. You should be out in the world, not tied to an old woman with a failing heart." But Daniel's reply was steady, unwavering. "I didn't fall in love with your years, Evelyn. I fell in love with you." The days that followed tested him. Evelyn's family withdrew further, refusing to visit. Servants whispered disapproval. Neighbors sneered when Daniel went to town to buy her medicine. One night, Evelyn woke to find Daniel asleep in a chair beside her bed, his head resting on his folded arms. A blanket slipped off his shoulders, his boots still muddy from the day's work. She reached out with trembling fingers, brushing his hair gently, tears welled in her eyes. In 85 years, she had known many people, but never had she known loyalty like this. The world, however, grew harsher. One afternoon, Daniel walked through the market when he overheard two women laughing. "He'll get his inheritance soon. She can't last much longer. Smart boy, marry her, wait for the funeral, and live rich forever." Daniel froze. Every muscle in his body screamed to lash out, but he didn't. Instead, he carried their cruelty like a wound straight back to the mansion. That night, sitting at Evelyn's bedside, he finally spoke. "They think I'm waiting for you to die," he said quietly. Evelyn's lips trembled. "And you resent me for putting you in this position." For the first time in decades, Evelyn felt young again, her heart fluttering like it once did in her girlhood. Slowly, with trembling hands, she cupped his face. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Daniel. I will marry you." Daniel had no gold, no diamond, nothing the world would call valuable. But from his pocket, he pulled a small band he had carved from wood. It was simple, imperfect, yet crafted with care. "It isn't much," he said, his voice low, "but it's made with my hands, and it's yours if you'll wear it." Evelyn took it as though it were the most precious jewel in the world. With shaking fingers, she slid it onto her ring finger. Tears blurred her vision. "It's perfect," she said, and meant it. That night, as snow blanketed the garden outside, they sealed their vow not with priests or witnesses, but with whispers and tears. Evelyn pressed her forehead against Daniel's, and for a long moment, neither spoke. It wasn't a wedding yet, not by law, not by the eyes of others, but it was the beginning. The choice had been made. No more hiding, no more fear. Evelyn Carter, 85 years old, Daniel Brooks, 25 years old. They would stand before the world together. And the world would tremble at their courage. The announcement came not with fanfare, but with quiet certainty. Evelyn wrote letters to her children, each one sealed with her trembling hand. Daniel told the townsfolk openly, his voice steady even as their faces twisted in disbelief. The news spread like wildfire, an 85-year-old woman, preparing to marry a 25-year-old man. At first came the whispers, then the laughter, and then the outrage. 3 days later, Evelyn's grand hall echoed with angry voices. Her children Clara, Michael, and Jonathan had all returned, their faces red with fury. "Mother, have you lost your mind?" Clara snapped, pacing the floor. "This is humiliation. The family name will be dragged through the dirt." Michael's voice thundered. "He's using you, can't you see? He wants your money, your estate, nothing more." Evelyn sat calmly in her chair, though her heart trembled. "And what is it you want, Michael?" "My estate, my wealth. Daniel has never once asked me for anything." Jonathan sneered, pointing at Daniel, who stood quietly by the door. "He doesn't need to ask. He's playing the long game. He'll marry you, wait for your heart to give out, and then live like a king." Daniel's fists clenched, but Evelyn raised her hand. "Enough. I know what you think. I've heard it from every tongue in this town. But I tell you this, if you love me, truly love me, you would see what he has given me, dignity, companionship, a reason to wake each morning." Her voice cracked, but her gaze was fierce. "He loves me. That is more than I can say for any of you, who come only when you fear losing your inheritance." After her children stormed out, Daniel walked through town the next day. Men who once nodded at him now spat at his feet. A group of young men blocked his path near the market. "You think you're clever, Brooks," one of them sneered. Marrying into money. You don't belong here. Daniel's jaw tightened. I'm not marrying her for money. Then what for? She's old enough to be dust. Laughter erupted, sharp and cruel. One of them shoved Daniel hard against the wall. But Daniel didn't strike back. His voice was calm, though his chest heaved. For love, something you clearly don't understand. The crowd mocked him louder, but Daniel pushed through, shoulders squared. He would not let them see him broken. That evening, Evelyn watched him return, bruises on his arm. Her heart ached. Daniel, I'm ruining your life. He knelt beside her, taking her hands in his. No, Evelyn, you're giving me life. Before you, I was just surviving. With you I'm living. Her tears spilled freely. But the world hates us. Then let the world hate, Daniel whispered. Because when I look at you, I see my world. And it is enough. Despite everything, her children's rage, the town's cruelty, they set the date. It would not be grand. No hundreds of guests, no ballroom filled with chandeliers. Just a small ceremony in the mansion's garden, beneath the winter sky. And as they prepared, the storm outside grew fiercer. But Evelyn and Daniel stood together, hand in hand, unshaken, because their love was no longer a secret. It was a declaration. The morning dawned pale and cold, the winter sky draped in silver clouds. Snow dusted the garden paths, but Evelyn insisted the ceremony be held outside. I want the world to see, she said firmly, no hiding. Daniel had spent the night preparing, shoveling snow, setting chairs, stringing white ribbons across the bare trees. There were no grand decorations, no orchestra, no crowd of admirers. Just a few loyal souls, the housemaid who adored Evelyn, a gardener who respected Daniel, and the priest who agreed hesitantly to perform the service. But as word spread, others came too, not to bless the union, but to mock it. Townsfolk lingered by the gates, whispering and laughing. Evelyn's children stood at the edge of the garden, their faces hard as stone, refusing to sit. Clara hissed to Michael, we must stop this madness. Michael's jaw clenched. If the priest doesn't refuse, we will. When Evelyn appeared, wearing a simple ivory dress that had once belonged to her grandmother, silence fell. Her steps were slow, her body frail, but her dignity was radiant. Snowflakes clung to her silver hair like a crown. Daniel's chest tightened. To him, she was not 85, she was timeless, beautiful, his. He stepped forward, offering his hand. Shall we, my love? Her eyes softened, and with a trembling smile, she whispered, yes. The priest opened his book, voice steady despite the tension. We are gathered here today, in the sight of God and man, to unite Evelyn Carter and Daniel Brooks in holy matrimony. Whispers rippled through the crowd at the gates. Some laughed, others scoffed, but Daniel kept his eyes only on Evelyn. When asked, do you, Daniel Brooks, take this woman? His answer came strong and clear, I do. And when asked, do you, Evelyn Carter, take this man? Her voice trembled, but her words were firm, I do. Just as the priest prepared to bless the rings, Michael strode forward. This must end, he thundered. You are stealing from our family, Daniel. You are making a mockery of this house. The crowd erupted with shouts, some agreeing, others booing. Daniel leaned closer, his voice steady as iron. Resent you. Evelyn, they don't understand. I don't want your money. I don't want your house. I want you. Even if all you had was a chair in a bare room, I would sit in it beside you. Her eyes filled with tears. She reached for his hand, clutching it with surprising strength. That night, Evelyn whispered words she had never thought she would say again. Daniel Brooks, I love you. Daniel's throat tightened. He lifted her fragile hand to his lips, pressing a kiss against it. And I love you, Evelyn Carter, more than they'll ever understand. The house was silent, the world hostile, her body frail, but in that moment, nothing else mattered. Their love had been tested, and it had not broken. It had only deepened. Winter's chill pressed against the mansion walls, but inside, the fire crackled warmly. Evelyn sat wrapped in a shawl, her gaze fixed on the flames. Daniel sat across from her, sharpening a small carving knife he used for woodwork. Silence stretched between them, heavy but not uncomfortable. It was Evelyn who finally broke it. "Daniel," she said softly, "do you ever think about the future?" He set the knife aside, looking at her with steady eyes. "Every day." "And what do you see?" "I see us," he answered without hesitation. "Together, no matter where, no matter how long." Her lips trembled into a smile, but there was sorrow in her eyes. "The world will never allow us peace. My children, society, even strangers who know nothing of us. They will all stand against us." Daniel leaned forward, his voice steady, certain. "Then let them. Let the whole world stand against us. I'll still be here." Evelyn's frail hands twisted in her lap. "You've given me companionship, Daniel, hope, but what happens when I'm gone? What will you hold on to?" Daniel stood, walked over to her chair, and knelt beside her. His hands enveloped hers, warm and strong. "Then let me hold on to you while I can. Not in secret, not in shame. Evelyn Carter, marry me." The words hung in the air, bold and impossible. Evelyn's breath caught, her heart pounding. "Daniel," she whispered, tears brimming, "you can't mean that." "I've never meant anything more in my life," he replied. "Let them call it madness. Let them mock. But I want the world to know that I chose you. Not your money, not your mansion *you.